There are moments when words fail, when the body must speak in a tongue older than language itself. In the ancient world, pain was not just suffering. It was communication, a sacred dialect, carved into flesh, etched into ritual, spoken through fire, through blood, and through silence. To us, pain is something to avoid, but to the ancients, it was necessary, holy, a bridge between the human and the divine. A prayer might rise from the lips, but it was pain that made the gods listen. In Mesopotamia, mourners would beat their chests, scar their skin, not merely to express grief, but to send it, to carry their sorrow into the sky. These acts weren't chaos, they were liturgy, ritualized agony, because the gods, they believed, heard the cry of the body more clearly than the voice. In Mesoamerica, this idea became law. The Aztecs believed that human pain kept the world alive. Each sunrise was a fragile victory, paid for with blood. When a priest pierced his tongue or genitals with a stingray spine, he wasn't just showing devotion, he was feeding the sun. And in the great temples of Tenochtitlan, captives awaited sacrifice, not as punishment, but as purpose. Their pain would nourish Huitzilopochtli, the war god, and stave off the end of the world. To suffer was to serve. And it wasn't just blood. In ancient India, ascetics known as tapasvins sought pain through hunger, through fire, through isolation. They believed that agony generated tapas, a spiritual heat that drew the gods near. The more the body burned, the closer the divine came. In Sparta, boys were whipped at the altar of Artemis, sometimes to death, not as punishment, but as offering, as proof. Pain was proof. So why pain? Why would the gods demand it? Because pain strips everything else away. No lies, no masks, just presence. In agony, we become honest. And the ancients believed that honesty was what the gods desired most. This truth is hard to hear. It should be. But to understand ancient religion, truly understand it, you must see pain as something more than suffering. You must see it as a language, one the gods might still remember. There is a threshold, beyond which the body is no longer just a vessel. It becomes an altar. Across the ancient world, worship was not confined to temples or sacred fires. It took place on skin, in blood, in the slow, deliberate unraveling of flesh offered to something greater. The body was not the bearer of devotion. It was devotion. In the highlands of Mesoamerica, long before conquest, priests and nobles performed acts of self-mutilation, not as punishment, but as praise. Using obsidian blades and stingray spines, they pierced their tongues, cut their genitals, and spilled blood onto bark paper, which was burned to carry the offering to the gods. This was not metaphor. This was the offering itself. Blood was currency, and pain was its weight. The gods, they believed, had bled to create the world. To give their own blood in return was to keep it alive. Among the Maya, kings drew threads of bloodied cloth through wounds in their foreskins. As they bled, they entered trances. Visions of ancestors, spirits, gods. Pain opened portals. The body became a bridge. In ancient Syria and Anatolia, worshippers of the goddess Cybele gave more than blood. The most devout, known as the Galli, offered their manhood. In a state of ecstatic frenzy, they danced to drums, whipped themselves into trance, and severed their genitals with sacred blades. Their blood soaked the earth. Their identity, their masculinity, their very selves, offered to the goddess. What emerged was not mutilated, but transformed, a new vessel, purified by pain. Why? Because in these worlds the body was not yours. It was borrowed from the gods, from nature, from time. To offer it back was not destruction. It was return. The costlier the offering, the greater its power. Even in the Abrahamic traditions, this logic remained. Abraham raises a knife over his son, not out of cruelty, but devotion. The willingness to offer a body was the highest proof of faith. In Christianity, martyrs walked into the flames, into the jaws of lions, into the iron jaws of torture, not as victims, but as offerings. Their bodies became letters to God, written in blood and smoke. Pain was not punishment, it was message. In every one of these acts, ritual bloodletting, mutilation, starvation, sacrifice, the body speaks, not through beauty, but through harm, because in a world where offerings must mean something, only the body has true cost. You can regrow crops, you can breed animals, but once blood is spilled, once flesh is cut, it cannot be taken back. And that permanence, that price, was everything. Across continents and centuries, humans took blades to skin not out of madness, but meaning. They bled not to die, but to speak. And in doing so, they believed the gods might finally listen. There is a point where pain stops being pain and becomes something else. In the ancient world, that threshold wasn't feared, it was pursued. Pain, rhythm, exhaustion were keys, designed to open the gates of the mind and let the gods flood in. Possession wasn't illness, it was revelation. Ecstasy wasn't indulgence, it was access. No god understood this more than Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, frenzy, and madness. His rites were wild, uncontained, ecstatic. His followers, maenads, abandoned their homes, danced in the forests, screamed into the night. They tore animals limb from limb with bare hands. They bled, they howled, they convulsed. But they weren't mad, they were inhabited. To be enthusiastic, in Greek, meant to be filled with a god. Dionysus didn't want calm prayer. He demanded frenzy, and in that frenzy, his presence was most vivid. Elsewhere, across West Africa, in the Yoruba tradition, the logic was the same. Drums, chants, dancers spinning into trance. As the rhythm escalated, the Orisha, divine spirits, were believed to descend. They rode the bodies of the faithful. The possessed trembled, spoke in tongues, moved like water or fire. Pain could be part of it. Burns, cuts, exhaustion. But the body didn't feel it, because the self was no longer there. Only the God remained. In ancient Mesopotamia, temples used pain and deprivation not just to expel spirits, but to invite them in. Isolation, starvation, incantation, tools to break the mind, to hollow the body so something else could enter. Pain was the threshold. In India, the logic crystallized in tapas, spiritual heat, generated through suffering. Wandering ascetics starved themselves, sat in fire, buried themselves alive. Not to die, but to burn away identity, to reduce the self to ash so the divine could fill the space left behind. In all of this, pain was not the end. It was the gate, and madness was the smoke that signaled the gods had arrived. Even in Christianity, the mystics knew this. Saint Catherine of Siena starved herself to nothing. Others beat their backs bloody with iron cords. The more they suffered, the more the visions came. When agony became unbearable, the angels began to speak. In North America, plains warriors hung from hooks pierced through their chests. They prayed, cried, waited for the vision to come. The pain was the call. The vision was the answer. This isn't about cruelty. It's about transformation. Everywhere, the belief was the same. To reach the sacred, you had to be emptied. And pain, deep, annihilating pain, was the only thing strong enough to burn you clean. When the fire passed through, what remained was not a person. It was a vessel, a message, a mouthpiece. They didn't just believe the gods spoke through pain. They believed the gods were pain, and that to feel it fully was to merge with them completely. When truth was too complex for human eyes to see, the ancients turned to the gods and asked them to decide. But the gods didn't write verdicts. They didn't argue law. They answered in pain. Across cultures, guilt and innocence were not uncovered through logic. They were drawn out through ordeal. If your body could endure suffering, then the gods were with you. But if it broke, if it bled, burned, or cried out, then the gods had judged and found you guilty. In medieval Europe, the accused might be bound and thrown into a river. If they floated, guilty. If they sank, innocent. But many drowned, proving their virtue. And still, the ritual persisted, because water, it was believed, was pure. It would not hold the unclean. In ancient India, a man accused of theft might be forced to hold a red-hot iron rod. If his hands blistered, the gods had condemned him. But if he emerged untouched, he was vindicated. Fire was sacred. It would not harm the innocent. In West Africa, the ordeal of the sassy wood tested guilt with poison. A brew made from tree bark was forced down the accused. If they vomited, they were innocent. If they died, the gods had spoken. The divine moved through the poison. The body, was their parchment. Even children were drawn into it. In old Japan, a suspected witch might be made to hold a baby. If the child cried, guilt was confirmed. If it stayed quiet, she was cleared. The infant became an oracle. Its pain, the voice of judgment. We look back on these rituals and call them barbaric, but to those who lived inside them, they weren't cruelty. They were clarity. Human justice was fallible. The gods were not, and the only way they could speak was through the body. Inquisitors knew this. During the Christian Inquisition, heretics were stretched on racks, burned, drowned, crushed, not just to extract confession, but to test the soul. If the victim endured, perhaps God was with them. If they screamed or broke, then the devil had claimed them. Pain was not evidence. It was the judgment. In some traditions, ordeal wasn't even about guilt. It was about worthiness. Spartan boys were whipped at Artemis's altar, not because they were bad, but because pain proved strength. The gods chose the strong, and strength was measured in scars. Ancient courtrooms stood beside temples. Judges were priests. Trials were rituals. Because the gods were not abstract, they were active, watching, listening. And when human judgment faltered, they made their ruling through the flesh. To hurt was to be seen. To bleed was to be measured. And to survive was to be transformed. Pain fades, but some cultures found a way to make it permanent, not just in bodies, but in stone, in ritual, in memory. The pyramids of Giza, the ziggurats of Babylon, the great temples of Angkor Wat. These weren't just houses for gods. They were built on the backs of thousands, carved by calloused hands, lifted by blistered bodies. Every block, every staircase, every engraving. A record of labor, obedience, and suffering. They weren't built to be comfortable. They were built to be endured. Sacred geometry through sacrifice. In Teotihuacan, the Temple of the Sun looms over an avenue once soaked in blood, a place where hearts were lifted to the sky, where pain became currency. And still, people come, not to mourn, but to wonder, because we don't just remember pain, we sanctify it. In Christianity, the image of the crucifix, the bleeding man nailed to wood, is the central symbol of an entire faith. Not the resurrection, not the miracle, the suffering. The moment of agony is the one we keep closest. In Islam, the martyrdom of Hussein is still mourned with passion plays and self-flagellation. His death echoes louder than his life. In Buddhism, stories of monks burning themselves alive as an offering still circulate. Proof of discipline, proof of faith. These aren't just tragedies, they are teachings. The sight of pain becomes holy. Pilgrims travel across deserts and oceans to touch the stones where someone once screamed, to feel the air where someone once begged, to walk where the blood once ran. Cathedrals were built where saints were broken, shrines where warriors fell, trees where prophets were hung. We don't just bury pain, we build around it. The Western Wall in Jerusalem, the killing fields in Cambodia, the caves of Elephanta, carved in silence and sweat. Each one a scar, visible from space, etched into the land itself. Because pain gives gravity, and memory needs weight. That's why the architecture of faith is so heavy, so massive, so eternal. It's not just about beauty, it's about endurance. If the pain was real, the monument must last. If the gods were watching, the site must remain. And so, even now, the ruins remain sacred, because even in silence, they still speak. They whisper of screams no one heard, of vows kept through agony, of beliefs so deep they crack the earth. We may not understand them, but we feel them. And in that feeling, the pain lives on, not as horror, but as foundation. Because long after the gods are gone, the monuments of pain still rise. We think we've left it behind, the temples, the fire, the sacrifice. But we haven't. The altars just look different now. They glow, they scroll, they never turn off. We no longer cut ourselves with obsidian, but we starve ourselves to meet a number. We exhaust ourselves chasing love that doesn't love us back. We bleed for jobs that take everything and give nothing. We think it's modern, but it's ancient. The same transaction, the same hunger. The only thing that's changed is the name of the god. In the past, you suffered for the storm to pass. Now you suffer so you can be seen. On screens, on platforms, on feeds. We sacrifice our peace for validation, our time for attention, our minds for applause. And still we ask, why doesn't it feel like enough? Because the pain has no witness, no altar, no meaning. It's pain without presence, and that makes it heavier. In the ancient world, your suffering was sacred. It had direction, it had weight, it had memory. Now it drips into the void, clicked away, ignored, buried in the feed. But we still crave that old exchange. Let me suffer, let me be seen. The gym becomes the temple. The therapist becomes the priest. The mirror becomes the god. We still climb, still cut, still cry out, hoping something bigger is watching, hoping our pain means something. Maybe it does. Maybe it always has. But we've forgotten how to listen, forgotten how to turn it into ritual, forgotten how to lift it into meaning. So it lingers, heavy, sharp, directionless. But pain never disappears. It waits. And when we're ready to face it, to feel it fully, to speak it aloud, to carry it into the light, that's when the ritual begins again. Not in temples, not in blood, but in presence, in the courage to hurt and not run, in the choice to stay awake inside the wound. And in that moment, maybe we're closer to the gods than we think.